Win big in 2024 with Team Sync from RotoBaller. Import your fantasy teams and sync your leagues. Get customized tools and tailored advice for your specific rosters and scoring settings, including live recommendations from the live draft assistant, free agent finder, and lineup optimizer. Sync an unlimited amount of NFL, MLB, and NBA and NHL fantasy teams from all of the major fantasy platforms. Get a discount for any premium pass using my promo code Knuckler. Just visit rotoball.com/radio and start balling like a boss. This podcast is also brought to you by Parlay Play Fantasy Sports. Use my referral code RotoBrady. Get that sweet, sweet deposit bonus. They got paid contests coming to a state near you. Boosts, slashes, bonuses all day long with this group. Go play some player prop DFS contests. It's a real fun platform. And what is up, everybody? This is Brady Grove bringing you episode 155 of RotoBaller's official MMA podcast. Tap that. We've got UFC 308 this weekend.
Break out the red panties.
And there's Aries FC, there's LFA. It's kind of a slower MMA week. You got to look to some far corners of the world to find different events on different days. But for my picks on all of that stuff and more, follow me on Twitter at RotoBrady. Follow the podcast on YouTube and Spotify at Tap That MMA Podcast. Come out to the RotoBaller MMA Discord on Saturday. I'm in the process of moving, but damn it, I'm still excited for UFC 308. Even though moving is a pain in the ass when you've done it 3 times in under 2 years. But finally, look out for my MMA DFS value picks article coming out on Friday afternoons this week for UFC 308. Some exciting values in the lower half of the price bracket. And with me tonight, frequent guest co-host on Tap That. Give it up for Connor Bones Slone. Connor, how's it going tonight?
It's going good. I can never complain when there's a Max Holloway card coming up. You know, he's one of my favorite fighters, so just looking forward to that.
And so, real quick, a couple things to touch on before we get into it. What did you make of the PFL event and the performances that Francis Ngannou and Cyborg had? Francis says putting Hidden Ferrer to sleep on the ground was amazing. And like, it kind of reminded me of like John Jones coming back against Cyril Gane, where it's like, ooh, after all this time, all these changes, what's going to happen? It was like, holy shit, that guy's really good. And then with Cyborg, it was like, damn, even with the Amanda Nunes loss and not having ran that back, she still has built a case for being the greatest female fighter of all time.
Yeah, I mean, I thought Ngannou looked very, very impressive. And I got pretty annoyed because after his win, I looked online. I just kept seeing people saying like, "Oh, Ngannou beat a can." Like nobody knows who that is, and I was like, "That is not true. He was a legitimate fighter. He is a legitimate threat, and he's the only person bigger than Francis Ngannou on Earth, probably. A bit of an exaggeration, but regardless." Yeah, and Cyborg just looked like Cyborg. I mean, she dominated. Her opponent is very, very good. The most recent person to be Kayla Harrison, if I'm remembering correctly. So, yeah, it was an interesting night. I'm excited to see what Francis does from here. I hope he stays with MMA. You know, we had a good run in boxing. He did really competitively against one of the best boxers at heavyweight and then got brutally knocked out. But hey, he made 2 big boxing fights worth of money, and that is very positive for him. So hopefully he just rides that wave and stays on in MMA.
It's so crazy to try to throw any shade at Francis for either of his boxing performances. I don't care what the circumstances are against Tyson Fury. What Francis Ngannou did that night, one, it was very impressive to do that to a guy who has been at the top of the world of the heavyweight boxing division for so long. And second, it put on a great show. It was great entertainment that there just wouldn't have been if he like showed out and didn't take it seriously or didn't look good. And then of late, Connor, some of the judging decision, there's been a record number of split decisions here over the last handful of weeks. And I think on certain weeks, I think more people, like some weeks it feels like all the wrong people are winning. Then I think like more so last week or a couple weeks ago is like there was a lot of split decisions and horrible cards, but it felt like the right people were at least winning them. And so, and just like a couple minutes for each of us, what do you want to see happen to the current judging criteria and the way people evaluate it? And I wanted to play this sound clip.
I want to tell me what you see. Let's go ahead and see by the fight what you saw in the ring.
That is such a classic Tito moment. Like I crack up every time I hear that. Also, if you haven't seen it, which I'm sure you have, Brady, but if anyone listening hasn't seen it, go look up where Tito tried to do a mic drop moment and he threw the mic on his own head. Like, how is that even possible?
So anyway, I wanted to, and we could do an entire podcast of Tito Ortiz sound bites, but
Yeah.
the topic of judging criteria. What are the things that you're kind of noticing? What are the things that you would like to see people evaluate properly and score? Because some of these decisions are like, some of them are inexplicable, and I don't know what to do about that because there doesn't seem to be any consequences for judges.
Yeah, and I don't think the criteria necessarily on how it's scored is the problem here. I think scoring based primarily on damage is probably the way to do it, but that is a little bit vague. So maybe they could add some more specifics in there. Um, I do see that judging in general is moving towards favoring damage over control time more, which is nice. But at the same time, you have situations like Jose Aldo, Mario Batista, where I thought Aldo did clearly more damage in at least two of those 3 rounds, and Batista just had him up against the cage for most of the rounds. So I don't understand why that one went to Batista. So I think it's trending in the right direction in terms of how they're scoring specific things. But at the same time, then you have just crazy cards out of nowhere. The most obnoxious one I can think of off the top of my head is Tai Tuivasa versus Rosenstruik. Like, who the hell gave that to Tai Tuivasa? I would really like them to see. I would really like to see them adopt 5 judges and possibly consider open judging. Maybe I think the 5 judges thing is something they could do tomorrow. That would be a positive thing, and it wouldn't really change things much. Obviously, the open judging, letting fighters know the score in between rounds, that would change things up a lot. So I could, maybe they could test that out on like the Ultimate Fighter or the Contender Series just to kind of gauge how it changes fights and how the fans react to it. But at least they would be trying something. Yeah. So I think 5 judges is a step in the right direction. Possibly considering open judging. And off the top of my head, I can't really think of many more solutions in that. Maybe just holding judges accountable more often. I think specifically with the Tai Tuivasa Rosenstruik fight, didn't they cut that judge like immediately? Like they immediately were like, "Hey, you're relieved of your duties for tonight." Because if so, I think that's definitely the way they should handle things like that. Because I mean, other situations that come to my mind: Paul Felder versus RDA, Corey Sandhagen versus why can't I think of his name? Thank you. Yeah, Cheeto. Like, who on earth thinks of those scorecards? And if they do, they should never be able to score a fight again when it's that egregious.
It was so crazy when they removed that dude. And really, I don't know. Like, I like to see that they were able to do that because they were like, dude, the event is actually in jeopardy if this guy continues to judge big fights. That part I get. I do think it's a dangerous precedent for just somebody to be able to go out and remove somebody because they disagree with the judge, even though everybody in the world might disagree with the judge. It's a weird, like, that's a slippery slope, but I see that you like have to have the ability to kind of take some emergency action. Um,
Same
and
with the referee as well. If you see a referee make a horrible stoppage, that's potentially costing somebody their life. So I don't know. I do definitely agree with what you said on the judging. It does set kind of a dangerous precedent just to be able to kick somebody out if you don't agree with their decision. So definitely something to consider.
And I like the idea of testing it out on the Ultimate Fighter, like some of the different scoring criteria, like judging methods and what. Because the only problem is in the Ultimate Fighter, you don't get like that many fights really over the course of the season, which is one per week. So I don't know if the sample size would tell us as much. But like the Contender Series, the Ultimate Fighter, Road to UFC, I think are all like testing fields that they could absolutely utilize. And there's Dude, like this event, UFC 308 in Abu Dhabi this weekend. We got a main event for the UFC Featherweight Championship between Ilia Topuria and Max Blessed Holloway. Max Holloway is the plus 200 underdog. Ilia is the minus 235 favorite. Max Holloway is now on a 3-fight winning streak. Fantastic wins over Arnold Allen, Chan Sung Young, and most famously, that freakish knockout, possibly moment of the year against Justin Gaethje in the final seconds. The only guy to beat Max Holloway in over 5 years is named Alexander Volkanovski. And
and Dustin Poirier, but that was at 155.
Over the last 5 years.
That their rematch was more than 5 years ago.
Yeah, April.
Holy
30th.
shit! Okay, I stand corrected. I thought I could have sworn that was like 3 years ago. Sorry about that.
That's how many times he's fought. Like in these big fights, like it hasn't been like 3 per year or anything, but like. So the only guy to beat him is named Alexander Volkanovski over a 5-year period. And really, a lot of people would argue that Max Holloway won, maybe one of those first two against Volk, maybe both of them. I do not. I am not in that camp, but I see how you can give the fight to either of those dudes in that one. I at least would never say it was a robbery. So Max Holloway has looked amazing over this stretch since April of 2023. We forget that there are some fighters that the rules do not apply to. The normal rules for fighters and like what happens to them after certain losses. Some people are a special kind of person, a special kind of animal. Max Holloway is one of those people. Ilya, El Matador, crazy how quickly the levels of competition that he jumped up. Really without too much activity. Like, he's only fought 4 times since the start of 2022. Goes from Jai Herbert, beats Bryce Mitchell, beats Josh Emmett, and then Alexander Volkanovski. And he did it in awesome fashion. He had the whole thing with the rose and the lead up to the fight. Connor, it just seems like bananas to think of Max Holloway as a plus 200 underdog against a guy with so little championship experience. And really, like, you can say, like, Bryce Mitchell and Josh Emmett, they're really tough guys. Volk, crazy, but like, nothing ever prepares you for fighting Max Holloway. I think like you have to go a little bit on just plus 200 Max. I think it's just downright disrespectful. And like what very well could happen is Ilya could actually come out and like sleep Max. That it seems crazy, but these are trends that we see with fighters when a younger champion is coming up. Ilya could be the next Max Holloway and have a better legacy. That's the way that this game goes. But this fight to go over 4.5 rounds to go the distance is plus 100. That's a rough one. And especially because I don't know what Ilya will be like in those later rounds. The only thing I can really think of right now is like Max plus 200 or like Max by split decision plus 850, Max by decision. What are you thinking on this one?
Yeah, I think the disrespect to Max on just from the odds is absolutely real. I'm taking Max all day in this. There are a couple reasons why. I do think Ilya is a very talented fighter, very powerful, very good boxing, well-rounded ground game. But like you said, Max Holloway is just a different animal. And approaching a fight against Max Holloway, like building up to it, having a fight camp for it, knowing your strategy going into it, I just don't think there's any way to properly prepare for it. I think he's a very unorthodox striker, and styles make fights. Volkanovski beat Holloway, Topuria beat Volkanovski. MMA math doesn't work, and I think that's a very clear example here. I think Max Holloway's movement, I don't want to say his length because I don't even know what the reach difference is. I know Max probably has a longer leg reach, which definitely is going to play a factor. But Max is just one of those fighters that uses distance management and his range very, very, very well. He's able to slide out of shots, slide in and out of the pocket very quickly, very effectively. I think I think his movement, he's going to avoid taking a knockout shot from Topuria. I think he's obviously going to get hit. He's, I think he's absorbed the most strikes in UFC history. So he's definitely going to get hit, but I don't think he's going to hit with that, one seminal blow that's going to be able to knock him out. He's got a great chin to fall back on, but I think his striking defense is also very good. And he's shown that in his past few fights. He's been a little bit more cautious than usual. And I think that's really going to play to his advantage here. I think Topuria is, from what Topuria, I'm judging this off of what Topuria is saying. Topuria is saying, I'm going to go out there, I'm going to point to the center of the octagon the first 10 seconds, and we're going to exchange, and I'm going to knock him out. It's like, no, that's not how it works. Max Holloway is not that dumb. He'll do it in the last 10 seconds of a fight. He's not going to go out there in the first 10 seconds, stand in the middle, and just trade with you. Like, when has he ever done that? He's only done that at the very end of the fight. You may catch him at the final 10 seconds. That's certainly a possibility. he may give you a chance to throw down after beating you for 5 solid rounds. But at that point, I think you're too tired. I think his chin's too strong. So I'm taking Max all day. I think his striking is just going to be way more diverse. He's going to use a lot more kicks very, very well. He's going to avoid the big shots. Topuria is definitely going to have his moments, but I think this is going to be a levels to this performance, and it's something Topuria is going to learn a lot from. And, he's going to come back much stronger from a loss like this. But I'm taking Max all day. I'm hammering, Holloway plus 200 all day. I'm not picking Holloway by knockout or Holloway by decision. I think that's too stressful considering he got a knockout with 1 second left to go to the last fight. So Holloway straight up taking that all day, every day.
And that's the other thing too, is that like I can definitely see my way to plus 200 for Holloway and then like a decision or something like that. But like, there's just no bet that I like for Topuria at these odds. Like, and I don't feel confident in saying he knocks him out or subs him or gets a decision. I don't know what that what an Ilya versus Max Holloway fight really looks like. I can picture the way Max wins it. I can picture a variety of ways that Ilya wins it, but none that I'm like confident enough that make me think that any of those odds are a value. Spoiler alert, Max Holloway is one of my DFS value picks for this week. And we move on to another one, Connor, because the co-main event is a middleweight matchup between Robert Whittaker and Khamzat Chimaev. Robert Whittaker is the plus 205 underdog. Khamzat the minus 240 favorite. Khamzat has not fought since October of 2023. He's only fought 3 times since October of 2021. Now, wins over Gilbert Burns, Kevin Holland, that was a really quick one. And then coming off the win against Kamaru Usman, a fight that plenty of people wanted to give to Kamaru. Now, people hate Khamzat. Some people love Khamzat. Some people absolutely hate him and would say that he lost any fight that he didn't put away. Gilbert Burns, that's a fight where people wanted to say, and here's the thing, these fights, while they definitely mean something for this dude to be at middleweight and at welterweight, and obviously he's had all the weird things with weight. He's a weird, he's got a weird aura to him. He's friends with a dictator, and people have some mixed feelings about that apparently. So, but the Gilbert Burns win and the Kamaru Usman win at middleweight, I don't really care about all those circumstances that are making me think too hard about the fact that those are impressive wins. And I don't think you can take that away from him, that in a very brief period of time, he made a tremendous leap up in competition and is yet to lose. Robert Whittaker, winner of 3 of his last 4 against Marvin Vettori, Paulo Costa, and Ikram Aliskerov. That was back in June of 2024. He has 2 wins in 2024. Now, there is only 2 people in the UFC that have beaten Robert Whittaker since February of 2014. Their names are Israel Adesanya and Dricus du Plessis. Wild that for a guy that has fought everybody at middleweight, if he had had the belt the entire time and Israel Adesanya and Dricus didn't exist, we would, again, I say it all the time, we'd be talking about Robert Whittaker like we were Israel Adesanya, that he has cleaned out this division. If Israel Adesanya doesn't exist, Robert Whittaker might be go down as the greatest middleweight champion of all time. It's very possible. And so now he's got a 2-fight winning streak, won 3 of his last 4. Every little moment, the Dricus loss, people were saying, starting to think that Robert was done. Not done, but that his durability was going to start to go, and that, those days of being a clear number 2 or whatever it was might be gone. Now, the middleweight belt is super winnable. Robert Whittaker is not far away from contending for the middleweight belt again, as crazy as it seems. Connor, all those circumstances, you look at Khamzat versus Gilbert Burns and Khamzat versus Usman, it spells real trouble for Khamzat in this matchup. At middleweight against a real middleweight, I think that if Khamzat is going to get Robert Whittaker down, it might be immediate in the first or second round. This is a fight, and I need to check. Is this?
I think it's 5 rounds, right?
Jesus Christ, dude. You cannot tell me Robert Whittaker is plus 205 in a 5-round fight against Khamzat.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
way that the Gilbert Burns and the Kamaru Usman fight went, I think if you can't finish Robert Whitaker, and like I think he can maybe hurt Robert Whitaker. You know, Hamzat swings big fist, but like Robert Whitaker is again one of those dudes like Max Holloway that the normal rules of humanity do not apply to. You know, even in the moments that we've seen him vulnerable, same as Max. And Hamzat might swing wild, but and like connect on some punch. He might get some good ground and pound. He might get close to a choke in one of those first 2 rounds. But if he doesn't put Robert Whitaker away, there's an absolute tornado coming for him in rounds 3 through 5. And so if he was getting touched up like that by Gilbert and by Kamaru, wait till you reach the, over the, 2.5 round mark against Robert Whitaker. Robert Whitaker plus 205, hammer it. He's one of my DFS value picks for this week as well. And like, this is one too where like I'm not necessarily like I don't love any of the method of victory picks. If I'm going Robert Whitaker, I'd probably go by decision, but again, I don't feel the need to do that. And then like I would take like a Hamzat like inside the distance if you're going with him. That's at minus 135. And I think that's actually a decent value considering like I think that's how Hamzat will probably have to get this win. I just don't see like winning the last 3 of those rounds if they happen. I don't love any bets on Hamzat either, except for like maybe inside the distance or like by sub plus 225. But I love Max Holloway and Robert Whitaker on this card. And I think that even though it might be foolhardy, it'd be a very fun parlay for this weekend.
Yeah, I completely agree with what you said, and I know one of my friends does have a parlay on that exact Holloway Whitaker combination. Which hey, I mean that's a strong play definitely because I agree with pretty much everything you said. I think this being 5 rounds is absolutely key. I think if this was a 3 round fight, I'd give the edge to Hamzat just because he is so strong in those first 2 rounds. But man, over 5 rounds, unless Hamzat just completely adjusts his game plan, which is certainly a possibility, unless he comes in there and is has a thorough feeling out process of Robert Whitaker, he is going to gas himself out. He's going to take Robert down. He's going to, he may get his back. He may get him deep into submission. But has Robert Whitaker ever been submitted? I don't even know off the top of my head. I can tell you he definitely hasn't been submitted since at least 2014 because neither Dreykus or Israel Adesanya submitted him. So, his submission defense is very good. His grappling defense in general is very good. Romero had problems taking him down. And, I think Romero and Whitaker, or not Whitaker, Romero and Chimaev both have that, explosive takedown skill. I think Chimaev is a little bit better at chaining them together and actually getting somebody down. But still, I mean, if you're able to chuck Romero off of you like 20 times like he did between their 2 fights, I think Chimaev's going to have trouble taking him down. I think he will get him down, but I don't think he's going to be able to finish it. So, I see Chimaev coming out strong, winning the first 2 rounds, and then Whitaker just taking over 3 through 5. Whether he gets a finish or not, I'm not sure. I think it just depends on how gassed Hamzat actually gets. I think, if he gets very gassed, Whitaker's going to be able to find that finish. But if he's improved his cardio a bit, probably go to decision, probably be like a 48, 47, 49, 46 type deal. So definitely taking Whitaker all day in this. Just like I'm going with the underdog in the main event. Hammer them both, and you'll make some good money, I think.
And like I was taken aback and rewatching some Hamzat fights this week, like the way he did get Kamaru Usman down so early and like kind of ragdoll him in that fight. But by the contrast, you get later in that fight and how he somehow made Kamaru Usman look like Roy Jones Jr. by the end of the fight. So now, like a much harder fight to try to call, especially when it comes to outcomes. We have a light heavyweight matchup between Magomed Ankalaev and Alexander Rakic. Alexander Rakic is the plus 310 underdog. Magomed Ankalaev the minus 410 favorite. These guys, I mean, even Alexander Rakic remains like a highly ranked light heavyweight in the UFC. That's just where that division is. Alexander Rakic has not won since March of 2021. 3 wins ago for him was Jimmy Manoa, June of 2019. Manoa was 39 years old at the time. He's actually lost 3 of his last 5 now. Now, one of them was a freak injury. And, he had the fight with Volkan that he lost by split decision. That was already, again, like almost 5 years ago. Then coming off a loss to Jiri Prochazka, April of 2024 at UFC 300. So in the meantime, his wins are Thiago Santos and Anthony Smith by unanimous decision. Okay. But even still, those fights are years ago. And now Magomed Ankalaev is coming off an easy knockout victory over Johnny Walker after the whole Johnny Walker's in the desert debacle. He had the draw with Jan Blachowicz that Dana White deemed so boring and horrible that he picked two completely other people to fight for the light heavyweight belt after that. And then, you know what? You know who Magomed's two wins before that? Thiago Santos and Anthony Smith. Everybody's got but like Magomed, besides like the fight against Jan that really like should have ended up like, or very well could have ended up being like him winning a title, was, those two like beheadings of Ian Kudalaba, beating Nikita Krylov, beating Volkan. I think it is crazy to say at this point that Magomed Ankalaev is a boring fighter, at least all the time. Like, that's not what like the amount of finishes he's had over the last few years would say. He's like knocked a ton of people out. Now, like the UFC's never had faith, like, or wanted Magomed Ankalaev to advance. You can tell by the matchups that he's continuously gotten, and having to fight Ian Kudalaba twice in a row and knock him out in the first round, and running it back with Johnny Walker, which like it was just like we knew that fight was going to mean very little for Magomed, and it just would have meant everything for Johnny. They were just giving Johnny a chance, and it seems like stupid for me to try to be contrarian and say that Magomed Ankalaev probably doesn't like beat Alexander Rakic by like decision. Rakic is a dynamic striker, and I think that like these two could very well end up in a split decision fight that's a little bit more exciting than the Magomed and Jan fight was. I don't like too much here. Like Magomed by decision even is -105. And how do I have faith in Alexander Rakic's durability and in his health over the last few years? I think it's very difficult to do that. Over two and a half rounds is -185. Under two, I don't like too much here. Like, I think if I was going to go anything, it'd be Magomed by decision, I guess. But I think that this one like is tough to call just because I do think Ankalaev should be a heavy favorite over Alexander Rakic. And I have no idea what I think of Alexander Rakic at this point.
Yeah, this is kind of a weird one. I don't know. I do think that Magomed is a little bit too heavy of a favorite. I think Rakic is a dynamic enough striker that he's going to give him some significant problems, especially with his leg kicks, unless Ankalaev has, somehow magically figured out over the last, year or two to somehow defend leg kicks. I think Rakic is going to chew his legs up. I mean, we saw that in the Blachowicz fight. I think we've seen, even in the Johnny Walker fight, both the Johnny Walker fights, Johnny Walker was able to land some good leg kicks. And Ankalaev just has a glaring weakness there. I think Rakic is smart enough just to, kind of fight on the outside, kick his legs a bunch, not take any major shots, defend takedowns, and he gets the win based primarily off of leg kicks and making Magomed limp around. I mean, I could totally see that happening. So, I think betting on Rakic here, it's kind of a, kind of a Hail Mary. Oh, I don't want to say Hail Mary. It's not really a Hail Mary. It's, I'd say he wins probably 45 times out of 100. I like those odds. I like 45 times out of 100 at plus 310. So, I might take that. I do definitely see it going to decision. I think Rakic is just going to fight a very smart fight. He's going to kick his legs a bunch, maybe punch him a couple times, but he doesn't have to. He's just going to chew his legs up. I don't know. That's how I predict it. I could be way off, but I don't know. I like Rakic as the plus 310 underdog here.
I do like what you're saying about this. And really, I think if you sprinkle a little on the first three underdogs at the top of the card, I think two out of those three are going to hit. I do think Rakic is smarter than Johnny Walker and Ian Kudalaba, more skilled. And there's that. It's a funny thing to say, but I think that, and I think the UFC wants Alexander Rakic to win this fight. I'm going to be rooting for him. I want to root for him after, the all the time he's had to take off. And I do think he's a more exciting dude to work his way up. It doesn't mean that Magomed didn't get kind of a raw deal at the top of light heavyweight. But it's so weird to have people fight for a title and then just be like, no, never mind. We're scrapping that one. And then the guy's like, well, I'm going to fight for the title like soon, right? And they're like, hell no, we've got a whole other plan.
Yeah, here's Johnny Walker.
Oh God. Okay. Yeah. You know what? I'm actually hopping on with you on Alexander Rockets plus 300.
Hell yeah.
I think that is the better one here. This is going to be this could be a very interesting swing of momentum across several different divisions after Saturday night. But next up, we got a featherweight matchup: Lerone Murphy and Dan Ige. Ige is the plus 245 underdog. Lerone Murphy, the minus 290 favorite. Ige famously hopped in on like 3 hours notice against Diego Lopez back at UFC 303, lost a decision in what like a fight he was able to make really competitive, and was coming off the win in February with a first round knockout over Andre Touchy Feely. And this is a guy that's like had to fight a bunch of dogs at featherweight. You know, he had the 3-fight losing streak against Chan Sung Young, Josh Emmett, Mobzar Evloev. He had to fight Calvin Kattar back in 2020. Wins over Nate Landwehr, Damon Jackson, losses to Bryce Mitchell. Danny Gay, placed himself in like a very unique spot of MMA history with the way that he stepped in against Diego Lopez. And obviously, like won over way more fans probably than he even had beforehand. You know, he's always been like a popular, fan-friendly fighter. But, he took on a different mystique after hopping in against Diego Lopez. And Lerone Murphy, coming off of a dominant win over Edson Barboza May of this year, wins over Josh Kulabau, Gabriel Santos, Makwana Murakami, Douglas Silva de Andrade, and Ricardo Ramos in a row before that. And I was like on the Edson side back in May when that fight was about to happen. And, just citing like the huge jump up in competition that it was going to be for Lerone and the fact that, Edson is a savvy veteran, obviously, who is a challenge for anybody and makes close fights. And especially after that like comeback that Edson was coming off of. But like he dominated 220 strikes to Edson 79, 4 takedowns, a very, very unanimous decision. For those reasons of the Edson Barboza fight, I think that these odds are appropriate. Like, I do think that Dan Ige is going to make this, I think that he's going to have his competitive moments for sure. And I think Diego Lopez, those circumstances were strange, obviously, going into that fight. Dan Ige has to fight a lot of dogs that have like good skills, but I don't think he like is always fighting guys with the skill levels of Lerone Murphy. I think like Murphy by decision, since this is a 3-round fight, that's minus 150. I do think that is the most logical option. I think like if you're going Dan Ige, I actually like Dan Ige by split decision plus 700. Just thinking he can like maybe get like a knockdown or land some harder shots in like 2 of the 3 rounds. Split decision props. The books are catching up, but you can still get some really good ones with the way that the judging has been trending. But I think Lerone Murphy by decision is most logical at minus 150. I do think he probably wins this fight like 65 to 70 times out of 100, maybe like 70 to 75.
Yeah, this is an interesting fight. I think it's one of those situations where my heart is telling me something different than my brain, which is really interesting because like I was very, mediocre on Dan Ige in the past. I was like, I don't know, he's a decent fighter. He's kind of boring. He doesn't have much swagger to him, but that completely changed. I mean, stepping on 3 hours notice, I think every single MMA fan around the world was like, holy shit, that is crazy. I have mad respect for Dan Ige now. So, props to Dan Ige for doing that and giving us an exciting fight. I think that really propelled him into, fan favorite category. So it's I want to see him have success. I just think Lerone Murphy is a little bit more dynamic of a striker. I think he's a little bit longer. I don't know. I could be wrong about that. I don't really know the reach, but I think he's going to use his range a bit more effectively. And I just see Dan Ige, losing 2 out of the 3 rounds. He may make a good comeback in the 3rd round, but it won't be enough. Maybe I don't know. I like the picks that you made: Murphy by decision or Dan Ige by split decision, even. But like I said, hearts goes for Dan Ige. If he gets a win, I will be happy to be proven wrong.
And now, Shara the Bullet is back in a middleweight matchup. Shara Magomedov, folks, against Armen Petrosian. Shara, the minus 158 favorite. Armen Petrosian, the plus 138 underdog. I saw a great take from Blood Money MMA just about how, he thinks this is going to be a kickboxing match, and he thinks Armen Petrosian is the more skilled kickboxer of the two. I know that people love Shar. Obviously, the UFC is pretty invested in this dude. But I think he's one of these dudes that like we all have very good reason to be skeptical of, with the way things have progressed. Not that he hasn't looked good at times or looked, very talented at times, for sure. But Armen Petrosian, for example, is coming off a loss to Rodolfo Vieira by early submission. Okay, we can definitely forgive that. And like for DFS purposes, I like Armen Petrosian too. Like by unanimous decision, like in his last two fights before Rodolfo Vieira, landing a combined 207 strikes against Christian Leroy Duncan and AJ Dobson. His only other loss is to Calparello, July of 2022, and landed triple-digit strikes against RoboCop. I like the volume that he produces, and I think that is going to be a difference here. When like we saw Shara in close striking numbers against Mikel Alexajuk his last time out August of this year, and before that, it's wins over Bruno Silva and Antonio Tricoli. I think like this is a jump up in striking skill level for Shara. And I think that it may be the flip side of the way that his fight with Mikel Alexajuk, not even that like there's going to be any takedowns because Alexajuk did get 3 takedowns. But I do think like if this is the fight that he's going to engage in with Armen Petrosian, I think that like this is one where he doesn't produce the volume, or the efficiency, maybe land some good strikes, but I think Armen's volume and the quality of his strikes in their own right is going to be what makes the difference here. I think like this could be a 50-50 fight. I could even see Armen being like winning 55 of these out of 100. I really like plus 138. And like, I think if you're gonna say some sort of method of victory, I don't know. I do think that this fight probably goes the distance. I had 6 unanimous or like by decision props on Wager Wars this past week. Still ended up losing despite the fact that I was positive on both of the last 2 weeks. Brutal at 0-2, but I've done well on there. 7 for 11 on Wager Wars. So, but where was I going with that? Damn it. So like I know like it's another fight where I'm saying like I think that this one goes the distance, but I don't know if this is one where we see a knockout. I think this is one where we see like 150 to 200 combined strikes, and I think in that kind of matchup, Armen is well suited to get the win.
Yeah, I have a couple points here that I want to really focus on. So first of all, I think it's hilarious how Magomedov can only fight in Abu Dhabi because that man has one working eye. I just want to point that out. If that dude ever fights in the U.S., I will be shocked. So, come back to me if that happens. But another thing is, this is a genuine question for you. Name me one weapon that Magomedov has besides his kicks.
Yeah, like his striking is like besides that, like his full package that he puts together is pretty like it's what sloppy, not or just maybe not polished as it should be at this level, I think is the better way to put it.
Yeah, I mean, I've never seen him, outbox somebody. He's won every single one of his fights by outstriking his opponent, to be fair, but with just kicks. I haven't ever been impressed by his boxing. I've yet to see him go for a takedown, so obviously that doesn't impress me. His get up, his skills in getting up, not super great either. So I mean, really, if you look at it, in my opinion, he only has an advantage in the kicking category, and I think that is, gearing up to get absolutely fraud checked. I don't know if it's going to be by Petrosian or not. I could see Magomedov, getting a split decision here, even a normal decision. But I do like Petrosian as an underdog here. I would take that any day because, like I said, that day is coming where he's going to get fraud checked. I mean, he got beat up by a dude in Dagestan because he tried to punch him because he saw him like kissing his wife or something. That is a real thing that happened. He tried to punch a random civilian in Dagestan who just beat his ass. Like, and then you get in the UFC. You're telling me that makes sense? That fraud check is coming. It's coming one day. I'm going to go with Petrosian here.
Well, Connor, in all fairness, I think we've all been in public and wish that some people would keep things behind closed doors.
Yeah, but
but-
yeah, it's just he also said some weird things about it. But regardless, I think the important thing to hold on to there is he got beat up by a civilian. To be fair, a civilian in Dagestan is different than anywhere else in the entire world. But I digress.
Yeah, Shara like should do as many movies too as possible. He has like the great henchman look, like that movie. And yeah, I see what you're saying too about like he's gonna get but like at the same time, and like the definition of that phrase is kind of liquid, but all these guys that we thought that would maybe happen to over the course of this, like Ian Gary, like Patty, we thought it would have happened at this point.
Oh,
And
it's still coming for both of those guys, but you got a good point still.
I agree that it is. I just don't like I've been like wrong about the earliness of the stages for it. You know, like
Yeah.
at the same time though, with Patty and with Ian Gary in the fights where I think that they lost, they got help from the judges, you know, by mere coincidence. And of all the people, was it the UFC realizing after Sean O'Malley lost to Cheeto Vera, like, yo, like maybe we need to be even a little bit more careful because we delayed the Sugar Show like being at like something we could really market like by a couple of years because of the like not being very careful with those matchups, which I don't want to see happen because that's how you become boxing when you know at like in some boxing's worst problems.
Right. No, I agree. I definitely agree. I thought Ian Gary and Patty Pimblett were going to get fraud checks sooner. Still haven't been fraud checked. So maybe today's or this weekend's not going to be the day that Magomedov is fraud checked. But I stand firm in that day is coming for all three of those guys. But whatever.
Ian Gary lost to MVP. You cannot convince me otherwise.
Bro turned into a wrestler. He took one punch from MVP and was put his Russian cap on.
That's all it takes. All he needs is 7 punches throughout the course of the fight, and those do what they need to. And now we've got a light heavyweight matchup between Ibo Aslan and Rafael Cerquera. I'm going to go with Cerquera. Now, Ibo Aslan is actually the minus 104 underdog. Rafael, the minus 116 favorite. Rafael has actually been like, he's fought at heavyweight a good amount. I think his last his last 2 fights were both at heavyweight in demo fight. The organization I actually like have heard very little about. He's had 3 fights canceled in a row, but like the record of his like last 2 combined opponents was just 7-4. But coming into this fight against Ibo Aslan, who at the very least won, these are 2 guys that rarely see the judges' scorecards. Ibo Aslan, 13-1 as a pro, 13 knockouts, including a history in Brave CF. He avenged his only pro loss to Anton Turkalej that he took in Brave CF, avenged it in the UFC back in March of this year, has a knockout over Paulo Renato Jr. in the Contender Series, was in Sparta Championship, Vendetta Fight Nights, Austrian FC, you know, like just a little bit more recognizability of some of the organizations that Ibo Aslan has been in, and he's proven this at the Contender and UFC levels. And still just knocking people out. That's exclusively what he does in the first round, in the third round, and you know was out voluming Anton Turkalej through the course of that fight as well. I don't necessarily see where they're getting Rafael as the favorite here, especially when you're kind of used to fighting a little bit more at heavyweight lately. It shows that you're a big light heavyweight. I just like that's questionable when somebody when they haven't been like at a super high level of the professional organizations, at the regional level, and they haven't fought in the UFC. It gives me questions at the very least. I don't see why Iba is not the slight favorite. Just in what he has proven in the UFC. I think minus 104 is fine. but Ibo Aslan by knockout plus 120 is a way more reasonable way to go. I think Ibo Aslan is one of my values in DFS this week as well, just because like for some reason, all right, this fight going over 1.5 minus 120, I actually think is a decent pick. I think that like both of these dudes, I think only have like I think I don't even know if they've ever been the distance. I think maybe Raphael has been once in his pro career. But I do think that they're gonna have to like feel each other out and be a little bit more careful here. I think Raphael has a little bit more of a potential to get a submission. That is plus 700. I think that is worth looking into. But Ibo Aslan by knockout, I think that is the most single, easily foreseeable outcome of this fight.
Yeah, this is an interesting matchup. I know a bit about Ebo, but I really didn't know much about the other guy. So I'm kind of looking through his page as you're talking there. I do think the odds are kind of strange here. I do want to point you, and you might have said this, but I want to point out that Ebo's only loss was to Anton Turkalej. I don't know how to say that, but he beat him in the UFC, so he avenged his one and only loss, which is interesting. Yeah, I like Ebo here. I mean, I think never heard of demo fight, which could be a red flag, could be absolutely nothing. But I do think Ebo has, at least proven that he is UFC worthy. We have not seen that from Raphael yet, just because he hasn't fought in UFC. I also agree that, honestly, if I was a guy that was kind of teetering the line between heavyweight and light heavyweight, I would 100% fight my way up the regionals as a heavyweight. Those dudes are sloppy as hell on the outskirts. I mean, you have even some sloppy dudes that are heavyweights in the UFC. I mean, look at the other weekend with one of the Taffa brothers. I can never remember one from the other, but they gassed in the first round. So I mean, 11-0 with almost all finishes is impressive, no matter what the standard is. Don't get me wrong, but 11-0 and with sketchy promotions that I haven't really heard of at mostly heavyweight doesn't really do much for me. So I'm going to go Ebo here.
Now, what I will say is, like, if somebody is fighting in light heavyweight when they've teetered between two divisions, it probably tells me that they feel a lot more comfortable at light heavyweight, because obviously the path of least resistance is heavyweight. Maybe you can get a little bit more activity out of guys at light heavyweight, but it's just crazy to me when we go for periods of time without new heavyweight talent. Like, dude, like I feel like Blagoy Ivanov was ranked like 2 years ago. Like, you could have made your way into the top 15 in the UFC if like someone had emerged, and like those were the guys that were getting fraud checked. Now, to be fair, those guys were like 30 to 34-year-old prospects and maybe even older. So it doesn't necessarily count. But
I also want to point out something really weird that I'm not sure if I've ever seen before. But Raphael, he had 3 fights on the Contender Series canceled. I wonder what the circumstances were there. I feel like he might be getting a chance in the UFC because he had 3 opponents pull out. Dana White felt bad for him and it's like, here you go. I don't know. That could be conspiracy theory, like tinfoil hat time. But isn't that kind of weird? Doesn't that seem kind of weird to you?
that is true. I mean, like, it definitely. It's not that like it's bad luck, and it's also not that he's doing something wrong, but it's like, where is your head and your camp at? Like, all that shaking up, like it can be good for some people and it can be bad. So I try not to miss too much on the psychological aspects, because it might motivate some people and they might thrive in it, or like they might be all like pissed off about it, or like have their head in the wrong spot. So I just don't know.
Yeah. I just thought that was strange, but no, I completely agree with your take on fighter psychology. We never really know what's going through these dudes' heads.
And like, yeah, I one of the most famous examples of that to me is even still like Anthony Smith after his house was burglarized, because like
You're
they
attacking my family.
they acted like that was some sort of advantage for him. Like he was like, it's like, oh, he can't possibly lose now. It's like, sure he can. He's not fighting the burglar. He's fighting another ranked UFC light heavyweight. Like, I think like thinking your family is in mortal danger is good for you going in. That doesn't make any sense. I hate when people do that. And then you see all the tweets before, and like on a more tragic note, like before the Walt Harris fight, you see all the tweets when he was fighting Overeem, like popping up on the screen that are like really put it like rooting all for Walt Harris tonight. It's like, dude, like that is on top of a tragedy. You have to carry that kind of pressure into a fight. Like that's not a good thing. So yeah, how people deal with circumstances, I really try not to guess that, and especially like after Jake Hadley's fight. Like in normal circumstances, Jake Hadley, you would like to think should have torn Cameron Smotherman apart, but someone steps in on late notice. He was preparing for a different style of fighter, and he looked lost. So anyway, now a fight that, regardless of where these dudes are at now, I think a lot of people are looking forward to seeing this fight at welterweight. Jeff Neal against RDA Rafael Dos Anjos.
Break out the red panties.
RDA, the plus 240 underdog. Jeff Neal, the minus 280 favorite. RDA coming off 2 straight losses to Vicente Luque and Matus Gamro. Got to like he actually like had some success against Matus Gamro. But like you look back to like the Fiziev fight, the Luque fight, one, the people were able to get him down a lot in those 2 fights, and Fiziev was just able to overpower him in terms of like the strikes were just doing crazy damage to RDA. That was back in July of 2022. And you got to go back, like, he's got 3 wins since November of 2020. Paul Felder in what was an awesome fight, Renato Moicano, and Brian Barberena. So, it's great because, like, you can't, like, put RDA too far down in his opponents because people won't take that seriously and they'll find it depressing. And you go too far up, and it seems like, even like with Luque, he's just outmatched at this point in his career where he's, now 40 years old. Jeff Neal, no, like, I always feel like I never know this dude's true age. Like 1990, sometimes I think this guy's super old. Sometimes I think he's still like pretty young. And I guess 1990 is falling square in the middle. But he hasn't won since August of 2022 against Vicente Luque in a fight where he got a 3rd round knockout, outstriking Luque 121-97, 2 knockdowns en route to that finish, a split decision against Santiago Ponzinibbio. Like you got to go back to 2019 where this guy was like stringing together a win streak that included a unanimous decision win with 2 knockdowns of Belal Muhammad back in January of 2019. So another guy where, like, you put him against the Wonder Boys and the Neil Magnies, and he's just not equipped to beat those guys over the course of 3 rounds in terms of overall skill set. Obviously, the guy's got good hands, he's got good power, and a lot of people thought that, like, maybe he should have beat. That's another one. I didn't necessarily think that with that one, but it was a very competitive fight. And then he got, like, ravaged through by Shavkat Rakhmonov. What are you going to do about that one? Like Shavkat very well could be the next welterweight champion whenever he gets the opportunity. I think Jeff Neal here, minus 280. I think that those are appropriate odds. I think, like, although plus 240 on RDA, I think that they're like, this is just well within both of these dudes' range. I do think that this is going to be a competitive fight. For it to go over 2.5 rounds is minus 170. I think the more likely guy to get the knockout here is Jeff Neal. By knockout, that's plus 210. I don't hate Jeff Neal by decision, and really like RDA by decision plus 375. Between those 3, I think that those are all pretty good. I think over 2.5 minus 170 makes some sense too, because I think for like one of the areas I see Jeff Neal getting the knockout is like in doing damage to RDA and similar to like Fiziev fashion, and just like doing enough damage to where like he just lands enough punches on the ground after like dropping RDA or like rocking him. I think that is the kind of finish like I could see happening where it has to take the course of the fight to kind of happen. But overall, like I think like Neal by knockout plus 210, that might be the best value of the 3.
Yeah, this is an interesting fight. I feel like these are both guys that, have their moments of real brilliance and then have moments where they just kind of have lackluster losses. I don't know. It's strange. I do think Jeff Neal probably has more crisp hands here, and I think if there's a knockout, he's more likely to get one. But on the flip side, I think RDA has a more developed grappling game, and if he can get Jeff Neal down, that's going to be a problem for him. I mean, I do think the odds are a little bit wacky in my opinion. I don't know. I like Jeff Neal as a favorite, but he's a pretty heavy favorite here that like I wouldn't fault you if you put some money on RDA. I think I'm leaning Jeff Neal here, but I wouldn't count RDA completely out. So, bet that as you see fit. But Jeff Neal by KO is probably what I would take.
Yeah, and like I even in the loss to Ian Gary, that wasn't one where like my confidence was drained on Jeff Neal. I
Yeah.
RDA grappling angle to this one for sure. It'd be frustrating to watch, like Jeff Neal not be able to get up when I'm sure he's gonna have success standing up. So I don't know. That'll be a fun one, and I guess like if I'm rooting for anybody, I'd love to root for RDA, but I think like Jeff Neal can, like getting another win would be kind of a little bit more meaningful for welterweight, just because you could still use him as a good gatekeeper for the top 10, top 15 of welterweight.
Yeah.
Um, and next up, we have a lightweight matchup. Connor's going to hang around at least for 3 more fights. Matus Rebecki and Mike Beck Oralby. Oralby is the minus 310 favorite. Rebecki, the plus 260 underdog. Rebecki, I definitely like. It's hard to say too many like bad things about him. He did get knocked out in that fight with Diego Ferreira May of this year, but he was on like a 4-fight winning streak where he was scoring really well in DFS at least. When he came into the UFC from the Contender Series, beating Nick Fiore, Loic Radzhabov, and Roosevelt Roberts. Even like a couple of years ago, maybe I wouldn't have been so spent on Roosevelt Roberts, but like that's a win that like you should have gotten if you fought him at this point in the UFC. But Oralby, this is another guy where like they didn't even have like you don't even have to guess like, well, all right, gets a win on the Contender Series and how's it? No, starts in the UFC against Uros Medic, has 7 takedowns on en route to a second round neck crank submission victory. And then in like another quality opponent against Elvis Brenner, he ends up winning by unanimous decision, outstriking him 65-48 with a knockdown, 5 takedowns to 3. I thought like when I first saw this line that I'd see a little bit more value in Rebecki, but really I think Oralby is very much the real deal in this lightweight. I think Oralby is like has shown in those first 2 fights that like he's a very skilled dude. And Rebecki has had success in the UFC, but not against anybody of the quality of Mike Oralby. I think like as far as how I think it happens, I think like maybe Rebecki is savvy enough of a grappler at least to avoid the submission. And I don't think that the same could have been said about Uros Medic. But so like maybe oral by decision, that is plus 150. And over 2.5 rounds here is minus 125. This is just one that I'm trying to not think too hard about because Oralby has looked phenomenal in the UFC.
Yeah, I think I'm taking Oralby all day. I do want to quickly point out one thing that I kind of got distracted by. But if you Google like a bunch of fighters, the ESPN page will come up, but it'll have a completely different fighter picture on there. Like if you look up Oralby, you'll see Justin Gaethje on the Google page. If you look up Jack Shore, it'll be Patricio Pitbull, which like doesn't he doesn't even fight in the UFC. I don't know. Thought that was really weird. For a second, I was like, wait, Orlby looks a lot like Justin Gaethje. And I was like, that doesn't, no, that's the dumbest thing I've ever thought. But yeah, I think I'm taking Orlby. He's had better quality wins. He's a terrifying looking dude. But also at the same time, a very nice looking dude. I don't know. I feel like he'd be a good guy to get a beer with, but he'd also be able to kill you in 1 second if you tried. So I think I'm taking Orlby here.
Yeah, you can never underestimate the looks fun to have a beer with quality in people. And he does like that's just a dude that like you could just eyeball and know that he is like a tremendous talent as a fighter. So
Yeah.
I think Rebecki is a good test for him again. Like if you start off your UFC career with 3 wins in that kind of fashion against Uros Medic, Elvis Brenner, and then Matus Rebecki, I think that I've seen all that I need to see for you to make a big leap up in competition with your next one.
Yep, definitely agree.
Now at middleweight, this is another fight that it's hard to see this making it 3 rounds. We have Abus Magomedov and Bruno Ferreira. Magomedov, the -135 favorite. Bruno Ferreira, the +115 underdog. Abus Magomedov. A guy that I've like definitely never hated. Like 26, 6-1. Obviously, this guy has like some tremendous flaws as a fighter. It's not a guy that we're talking about like as needing to move up, you know. And crazily enough, his last two fights ended up going the distance. And you know, he has a UFC win against Dustin Stoltzfus and against Worley Alves. Only the first one was by knockout. He was in KSW before that. He had a couple of fights. I mean, a unanimous decision win over Sadabu Sai in PFL back in 2018. This guy's all over the place. And what I will at least say is that in his fight against Sean Strickland, he did have some moments. Like Sean was taking some big punches from Abus early in the fight, and then Abus just gassed horribly. Like one of the quickest gassings that I can remember, like just off the top of my head, where like Sean really showed his discipline and why like that style of just like racking up the volume over the course of the fight is just so effective against a large percentage of the division. Because Abus was swinging big, and like Sean took some hard punches, and he just survived them, and Abus had nothing left. Bruno Ferreira, on the other hand, now he will be at a 6-inch reach disadvantage. He is coming off of 2 straight knockouts against Phil Hawes and Dustin Stoltzfus, both this year. Also has a knockout over Gregory RoboCop Rodriguez. He himself has been knocked out by Nursultan Ruziboev. Ruziboev, who I would like to give more credit to. I mean, like, but his last win was Cedricus Dumas, and we know that I can't really count that. I think like if I have to pick one of these two dudes to get a knockout, because like Bruno Ferreira, all of his UFC wins have been first round knockouts. Like, I don't know if I think like Abus really like. Do I have the confidence that he has like the overall skill set to survive Bruno Ferreira over like 3? Like, I definitely not. And so if you're picking either one of these guys to get a knockout based on their UFC pedigrees, I'm really going Bruno Ferreira. And I think like Ferreira +115 might actually even be safer because I think some wacky stuff could happen in this fight too. But like Bruno Ferreira by knockout +225, I think that that's good. But I'm very comfortable going Bruno Ferreira just like money line. Because I think that this fight, like, it's just so close. What are you using to possibly differentiate these two? I really think that this fight like is as close to pick 'em as it can get. So I'm going plus money.
Yeah, I completely agree. I actually like Ferreira in this. I don't know. I don't know. I think it's the win against RoboCop and his last win where he got the spinning back elbow has just like made me a huge fan. So I may be a little biased here, but I think he's just very powerful. He's got a lot of tools in his bag, and I see him kind of chopping down Abus. I like him here, especially at underdog money.
And so next up, hilarious heavyweight matchup. Jake Wu and Chris Barnett. Chris Barnett has had quite a saga here since his last fight, which, if you can believe it, Connor, was the weekend of my bachelor party, September of 2022. That was the last time we saw Chris Barnett.
That's crazy.
By second round TKO over Jake Collier, in which he like displayed like how he can utilize his grappling, you know, in an offensive way. Since then, he has had 4 fights canceled. Chase Sherman, Muhammad Usman, Waldo Cortez Acosta, and Junior Tafa. All fights I would have liked to see, especially if he was going to fight Muhammad Usman and beat him. That would have been awesome. But really, like, it's hard for me to be like that confident in Chris Barnett. This is one where I'm definitely going to be rooting for Chris Barnett. I think a lot of people will. But the wins so far, like 2 second-round knockouts against Gian Viante in 2021, who apparently was not retired for 5 years in 2021. Gian was still around in 2021 fighting people in the UFC. That's a time warp. And his other 2 losses are to Ben Rothwell. Ben Rothwell, May of 2021. Yeah, unbelievable. I cannot believe these things existed at the same time. And then a unanimous decision loss to Martin Bidet, a pretty thorough one too, getting outstruck 56-23, getting knocked down once. So as much like we love the Chris Barnett highlights, but really like as far as like what he's accomplished so far in the UFC, it is rather very limited. Now, Kennedy used to be a light heavyweight. He's a freakishly big human, 6'5", 83-inch reach. Being at heavyweight is so weird for him, and like he's coming off 2 straight losses, a knockout against Dustin Jacoby and a split decision loss to OSP back in March of this year. He did have a 3-fight winning streak at light heavyweight from July 2022 to May of 2023, with, all finishes, including a guillotine against Devin Clark. I think, like, you have to, I see no reason to say that Chris Barnett wins this fight, really. And what did I say that he was here? Chris Barnett is the plus 600.
Oh my God.
Plus 600. I just don't think that Chris Barnett, like, can he maybe hurt Kennedy? Yeah, but like I think that even some of Chris Barnett's wackier tactics are going to be neutralized by like the distance that Kennedy's able to maintain with his size. And I think that Kennedy's going to be a hard guy for Chris Barnett to like get up close to and like get on top of. I don't know how like much success I can see Barnett. I can see Barnett trying some fun stuff and people will cheer. I'll be excited. But even like Kennedy, how did he just perform against OSP? That's even enough for me. Where if you can land triple digit strikes, I think that like there's a clear like skill set gap here, and I have to go just like this is another one where like I don't know if I like too many props here. Like oh my god, like I don't know. Kennedy by knockout is minus 160. Kennedy by decision is plus 400. Those are the only two I'm really liking. Like Chris Barnett plus 600, it's tempting as a heart play, but I have to make myself not make it. And I do think like maybe this fight goes over 1.5 rounds at minus 115. That's another one that I feel okay about. But I think Kennedy should win this fight like 80 to 85 times out of 100.
Yeah, this is just such a weird matchup, and it's going to be so funny to see these dudes next to each other in a cage. I mean, you got 6'4" Kennedy, who's like, shredded, and then you got Chris Barnett, who's like, how tall is he? Like 5'9", 5'10"?
Yeah, like this is gonna look like Stephen Struve versus Pat Barry.
Yeah, no, it's going to be hilarious, and I don't know. I mean, part of me is like, F it. Maybe Chris Barnett can take him down and get a finish, or just control him for 2 out of 3 rounds. Like, I don't feel like we've seen Kennedy's takedown defense tested enough. It's going to be hard for Chris Barnett to get within that range, absolutely. But like Kennedy is just such an awkward striker that maybe Chris Barnett can exploit some of that and just not get finished and manage to pummel through for a takedown. I don't know. This is such a weird fight. I don't want to bet on Kennedy here because he's such a favorite. Part of me is just like, yeah, let's bet on Chris Barnett because like who doesn't love Barnett plus 600? Why not? So I might just do that. Like this might just be a purely heart play, exactly like you said. Like, fuck it, let's see what Chris Barnett can do. That'd be hilarious if somehow he won.
And the other problem with it that I see is that, like, I think the more likely of the two to fade in a really meaningful way as the fight goes on is Barnett, unfortunately. I want nothing more than Chris Barnett to get a win on Saturday. And I hope that he proves, at least me wrong in this situation. I hope anything that you sprinkle on plus 600 hits. But Connor, are you gonna get going here or what's up?
Yeah, I think this is where the extent of my knowledge taps out. So,
all right, well, folks, Connor Bones Slone, thank you for being here again tonight, Connor. We'll be in touch and we'll be talking about UFC 308 as it's going down. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Brady. See you, man.
All right, now we have a bantamweight matchup between Victor Hugo and Farid Basharat. Like many of Basharat's fights, he is going to be the favorite in this one. He is the minus 650 favorite. Victor Hugo, the plus 475 underdog. Let's start off talking about Victor Hugo. 25-4 as a professional. Has one of the sickest profile pictures I've ever seen on Tapology. Go check it out. His nickname is Striker. 31 years old, 8 knockouts, 9 wins by submission, 8 by decision. Jack of all trades. Came in to the I mean, he's been in like Aspera FC, Pancrase, some, reasonably recognizable places. But, his 2 fights in the Contender Series and in the UFC, a second-round knee bar over Eduardo Torres Kaut on the Contender Series October of 2023. Then he's coming off a unanimous decision victory against Pedro Falco April of this year, where I believe he was the underdog, outstriking him 68-42. He did get taken down once, but he got a knockdown throughout that fight as well. Fareed Basharat, 4-0 in the UFC, 3 decisions, 1 first-round submission. He has beaten the likes of Damon Blackshear, Clayton Rodriguez, and Taylor Lapilus, the most recent in his most recent fight. Outstriking him 42-40 with 5 takedowns. He got 30-27s on all 3 judges' scorecards in that one. And so, this is one that I do not necessarily want to overthink either, because, I don't know. I think, Hugo was impressive in his real UFC debut against Pedro Falco, for sure. And plus 475 might be a little too much. But Fareed Basharat, really, by decision, minus 150, I think is the best value you're going to get here. If you're going, Hugo has 2 losses by knockout, 1 loss by submission, 1 by decision. The most recent was actually a rib injury against Mike Linares in the Warriors combat in 2014. So, so he's had a long pro career, first of all. But this is another where, Fareed Basharat has given us reason to continue believing in him. Pedro Falco, is still just a guy that, at the Contender Series level looked good. So it's hard to take too much, away from that on Victor Hugo's side. Basharat by decision, I don't know. I'm not taking anybody on the money line here. I think that there's plenty of spots for that on this card, and I don't think that this is necessarily the place for it. It's a question of overall skill set, where Fareed Basharat has come out on top in every single one of the matchups. So minus 150 by decision, I like it. Hit it, and I hope you can hear the sound drops with the medium of recording that I am using. And if I'm going Hugo, I don't feel the need to go method of victory. If you're going with him, go plus 475, but I don't think this is the one to do that with. Next up, we got 2 fights remaining. We have a middleweight matchup between Ismail Nardiev and Bruno Silva. Ismail is the minus 180 favorite. Bruno Silva, the plus 155 underdog. Ismail, 2-2 in the UFC. And, crazily, hasn't had a UFC fight since February of 2020. Now, Ismail before that, because he's a professional with a 23-7 record, 28 years old. And since he left the UFC after losing to Sean Brady by unanimous decision and Chance Rencounter, I believe, has a win too in the UFC over, Michael Prazeres, Sair Bahadurzada. And then, after that, hops back in Brave CF and actually doesn't do much winning. In Brave CF, he actually ended up 3-3 since he exited the UFC. He's actually only won 1 of his last 3 in Brave CF before coming into the UFC. He hasn't fought in 2024. On the other side, Bruno Silva, who is 7 years older, granted, coming off of 3 straight losses, but to Brendan Allen, Shara Magomedov, and Chris Weidman. Weird to take a loss to Chris Weidman, really, in March of 2024. And, he apparently hates Chris Weidman. I forget what that's all about, really. The other losses were to Shara the Bullet and Brendan Allen. But his last win, April of 2023, by first-round knockout against Brad Tavares. This is a guy that, hasn't done much winning of a recent sample size with 1 of his last 6 fights. But you don't have to go back that far, really that far, just to 2021, where he had 3 knockouts in a row over Wellington Turman, Andrew Sanchez, and Jordan Wright. So, why would I right now believe that much in Ismail Nardiev? I can't come up with too much of a reason. It's not... Brave CF is a great organization, but would he be getting this opportunity had he not already been in the UFC? Seems unlikely. Bruno Silva, this wasn't a cancellation. This is the matchup that they made. Oh yeah, I remember why. It was all the it was the points not being taken against Chris Weidman, as I recall. Yeah. Yeah, it was the eye poke in that fight. That's what happened. Right. Bummer. Um anyway, Bruno Silva, I don't know. I don't know. Like when Ismail was last in the UFC, it was I don't know on this one. When your last loss is Chris Weidman. I don't know. Silva plus 155. Silva by knockout plus 250. Ismail, maybe Ismail by decision or Ismail by submission. Ismail by sub is plus 600. Maybe go that route. By decisions plus 300. Those are good enough values. I think that the odds reflect that, like, probably the individual most likely outcome just on history is Bruno Silva by knockout. I don't know. I don't like the coming and going from the UFC, but like you see, and like what he did in Brave CF since then, but like it benefits some people. Some people come back, so much better. Again, some people come back even worse. This is one of those psychological aspects that I try not to guess too much on. And really, I don't have too many strong feelings about this fight overall. I'll probably be rooting for Bruno Silva. Um, yeah, yeah. And finally, we're to the first fight of the card, a welterweight matchup between Renat Fakhretdinov and Carlos Leal. And so Renat Fakhretdinov had a saga of his own. He was supposed to fight Nursultan Ruziboev, and I think that was the only match. They were still trying to find a replacement for Said Nurmagomedov up to a certain point. So that's where some of the Magomedovs ended up going. There would have been more. There would have been more Magomeds and Magomedovs. Saeed is not there. So there's been some shuffling on this card. Because again, Kennedy was supposed to fight Justin Taffa on this card and supposed to fight Marcus Rogerio de Lima. So Renat Fakhretdinov ends up fighting Carlos Leal, who got the call. He is 30 years old, fighting in LFA, UAE Warriors, PFL. As recent as 2023, had a good run in PFL. His only 2 losses in PFL, even through like the Challenger series that he was in, was to Sadibou Sai, both by decision, the last one being by split decision. And so it's great. Like he ends up taking 2 fights both in this year, and UAE Warriors and LFA gets 2 first round knockouts after a split decision loss to Sadibou Sai. Wins over Delano Taylor and David Zawada, both by knockout in PFL. Has a win over Ray Cooper by decision. Carlos Leal is definitely like gonna catch some people by surprise. Whether that means that he wins this fight or not, because that's a different story entirely. But I think people should like Carlos Leal. He was really fun in the PFL and he was very competitive. But then you look at Renat Fakhretdinov. He is 4-0-1 in the UFC. It's hard for me though. Like I think Carlos Leal is actually kind of live here. Leal, for instance, I don't think Shavkat's plan or Renat Fakhretdinov's plan is going to change all that much with a different opponent. But Carlos Leal plus 210 when Renat really like from your last matchup.
But I'm not impressed by your performance, and I look forward to.
So like his win over Brian Battle was dominant for sure. The win over Andreas Michailidis has very limited meaning, and so does the win over Kevin Lee that he has July of 2023. You have the majority draw against Elijah Zaleski dos Santos in a fight where, like, performance-wise and statistically, Renat Fakhretdinov, did very well. But then you have a split decision win over Nicholas Dalby, outshooting him 68-66 with 5 takedowns. Like, Carlos Leal can definitely win this fight on the feet. If he can get up and can limit the effectiveness of those takedowns for Renat Fakhretdinov, even just keep him to 5. You know, you put yourself in position with that kind of like Nicholas Dalby did, except you're in better position to do damage standing up. I think Carlos Leal is another live underdog on this card. Plus 210. I would go straight up with that. Like, I don't know that Carlos Leal knocks out Renat Fakrdinov. But I do think that like the success that we have seen from Carlos Leal in the PFL and in the 2 fights that he's had since then is meaningful enough for me to say that plus 210 is a good number. I think that Carlos Leal could win this fight like 35, 40, maybe even 45 times out of 100. Plus 210 makes sense to me. And if you're going Renat Fakrdinov, I'd probably go by decision. When's the last time Carlos Leal was stopped? I don't know if he ever has in his professional career. So Renat Fakrdinov by decision is minus 110. I think that's how you get a good value on him. But like, I do think Leal is worth taking a look at plus 210. I feel pretty good ways about a handful of plus 200 underdogs on this card. And so did Connor Bone Slone. Folks, that is it for episode 155 of RotoBallers official MMA podcast. Tap that. Again, for my picks on all high-level mixed martial arts, regional promotions, things on UFC Fight Pass, major boxing matches, follow me on Twitter at RotoBrady. Follow the podcast at Tap That MMA Podcast on YouTube and Spotify. Come out to the RotoBaller MMA Discord on Saturday. Let's talk about UFC 308. Check out my MMA DFS Values Picks article coming out on Friday afternoons every week moving forward. I'm going to have an interlude episode coming out with the Vegas Nighthawks Assistant Director of Player Personnel, Evan Wilsmore, who has come back on Tap That. That was recorded a day ago. It'll be coming out after UFC 308. Folks, thank you so much for listening. Have yourselves a great week. Enjoy UFC 308 and peace.